Home Assistant is the heart of my smart home, the most important control center to manage everything possible in my home. Accordingly, it is of course super important that Home Assistant is always accessible to me. But so far, the whole thing has been running on such a small computer, which, as we know from computers, is not protected against failures, be it the power supply, the hard drive, or other components. All things will eventually break sooner or later. The problem is, since I have Home Assistant running here, and it's essentially a central control unit, in this case, my entire smart home network would go offline. To address this issue, I want to make my smart home highly available, meaning always accessible, in this video with you, so that we are not dependent on this one computer, and if it ever fails, we can easily replace it without even noticing the outage. How the whole thing works, I'll explain to you after the intro, as always. Enjoy. So I want my Home Assistant instance to always be accessible. In doing so, I want to include not only my own Home Assistant instance, but also all the services that revolve around it and into this redundancy. That means itself and so on and so forth. The easiest way to do this is, of course, to make the entire Home Assistant OS always accessible, as all services can naturally be installed as add-ons and are thus included. One could also extend the whole thing to other respective virtual machines, but we'll get to that later. First of all, of course, the question, what do you actually need for this? Actually, we don't need that many things for this, namely, on the one hand, a computer. Ideally, we need it multiple times because we don't want to be dependent on just one computer. We need, and this is very important, for this experiment, mitzvah, 3 computers. Why 3 computers, one might ask? It's quite simple. Let's imagine we only had 2 computers. We want to have redundancy, so we have a second computer accordingly. Then, in the event that, for example, the power supply fails, the following would happen. One computer would try to find the other and discover that it is currently unreachable. Now, of course, the question is, what is the reason for this? Is it computer A, which is currently querying computer B that has experienced a failure and cannot reach it? Or is it perhaps the other way around? That this computer is actually the reachable one and cannot reach the other because something has failed there. Accordingly, we would have a stalemate and could never determine which of the 2 computers has actually broken down. In the worst case, the IVT, they simply cannot reach each other, so both go into the mode of becoming the new supercomputer. And what happens? We have a collision in the network. Both are trying to keep Home Assistant online, and ultimately, the entire network goes down. Accordingly, we need 3 computers so that in the event one computer fails, the other 2 can still reach each other and verify that they are not the ones with the problem on their side. Furthermore, we need 2 hard drives, one for the operating system and one that we use separately for the highly available or fail-safe storage. My recommendation this week is for this N100 computer. I have linked it for you below in the video description. It has the capability to accommodate both an M2 SSD and a regular SATA SSD directly inside. So we can implement everything directly with SSD storage, which gives us a speed advantage. Additionally, we have multiple network ports here, and each of them is capable of 2.5 gigabits. I would actually recommend doing this because we need to be aware that as soon as we make any hard changes to our Home Assistant, these changes need to be transferred to the other computers as soon as possible so that they always have the same storage state. Additionally, we naturally want to be able to read and write from the outside, and especially if we are streaming movies and series in parallel, a 1 gigabit port can quickly reach its limits. Accordingly, it is almost worthwhile to actually build a small mini network in which only these 3 computers are present. And this network can be used to sync these computers with each other. Don't worry, you can also do this with a 1 gigabit port. Since I don't have 3 of these computers on hand right now, I did it with 3 different ones, each with only a 1 gigabit port. Step 3 is now to install Proxmox on all of these computers and prepare it as I did in the last video. I'll link that for you up here. Here it is again in fast forward. So we download the Proxmox Community Edition from the Proxmox website, then install Balena Etcher, flash the image onto a temporary USB stick, insert the USB stick into the computer, connect the mouse and keyboard, enable virtualization in the BIOS, boot from the USB stick, then select the SSD in the menu to install Proxmox there. Let the installation run through, restart the whole thing, see the device's IP address, and then repeat this for the other 2 computers. The current status is that we have 3 of these mini PCs, each with a fully installed Proxmox instance. Before we start with the setup, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. That would really make me very happy and help me out. So now we begin with the setup. From now on, it gets exciting because we are now creating a cluster. To do this, we go to Data Center, Cluster, and then click on Create Cluster. Now we can give it a name. I'm just going to call it Prox Cluster. Here we can theoretically also set the network interface. But I've just left it on the normal network interface. Then we get a task OK, and we see the created Prox Cluster here. Now we click on Join Information, go, and copy this information once. Then we go to the second computer, click again on Data Center, on Cluster, but this time on Join Cluster, and paste this string. Now we need to enter the password of the computer where we created the cluster. This will take a moment, and then it will be added. And we already see 2 computers under cluster nodes. We will now do the same with the third one. So again, go to Data Center to Cluster, join Cluster, paste the information again, enter the root password again, and then join Cluster. We need to reload the page once, and we will see an error message again. Click on Accept Risk, log in again with our user credentials, and now we see in the Data Center that the 3 Prox clusters appear here. We have now successfully created a cluster. Now we need to share the storage space with each other. We need to start this on one of these nodes as a representative. I am using Proxmox 2 here. Click on Ceph, and then I can select a version at the bottom. I choose Reef here. It's somehow the one you should take, and I need to set this package to no subscription once, and then I can start the installation. We'll let this run through now, or rather confirm it here with Y, and then it will take some time until it's installed. We should wait on the first computer because we need to perform a small setup that we won't have to do on the other computers. Once this is completed, we click on Next. Then we need to select the IP address again, and we can leave the rest as it is. Click on Next, and then we have completed the configuration. Now we need to do the same for the other 2 computers. So again, select Proxmox 1, Ceph, install Ceph, no subscription, and Next. It's important that you make exactly the same selections as the first time. So here again, Reef and no subscription. And we can already do the same in parallel for Proxmox 3. Ceph, install Ceph, Reef, no subscription, and confirm start installation with Y. And as soon as that is completed, Next. And now you can already see here, configuration already initialized. So we can simply confirm the whole thing. Then we receive a warning message here. This is completely normal because we currently don't have 3 computers running yet. And then we also complete the third one here. Next, next, finish. So, and then we already have 3 computers with a Ceph storage. Next, we need to take care of the storage space. For this, I click here on Proxmox 3, Ceph, and then OSD, create OSD. And now we need to select the hard drive that we want to use as storage space for this. Then I click on Create. This will take a second. In the meantime, we can already do the same with Proxmox 2, OSD, create OSD, select the hard drive again, create, and Proxmox 1, OSD, create OSD, and also select the hard drive here. So when we press Reload here, we can already see how the 3 servers are slowly being displayed with their hard drives. We wait briefly until that is completed. So, and then we already have the 3 computers each with their 3 hard drives, and we can now create another monitor. The first monitor for the computer where I did this first was created automatically. For the other 2, we need to do it manually. So Proxmox 2 is already running. We click on Create here, host Proxmox 3, create. Then we have another one for the third. And then we do the same again for Proxmox 1. So clicked on Proxmox 1, on monitor, and then on create. So, and then we have 3 monitors running here. Now we create a pool, a shared high storage with core that should be available on all 3 computers. To do this, we click on Pools, Create, and can give it a name. I'll just call it Prox Pool. Size 3, because we have 3 computers. And leave everything else as it is. Create. So, and then we have it. If everything worked, we can expand the 3 computers and see this prox pool on all 3. You see that on the other 2, it is still marked as a question mark. So everything is now being synced, and as soon as it is available, you will see it displayed here as normal storage space. To test everything now, we need to install Home Assistant on these computers. For this, I use the script that I already used in the last video. So I click on Proxmox 3, on Shell, and insert the script to install the Home Assistant OS. In this case, select the advanced configuration. I actually leave everything on the default settings, including the RAM, CPU, MAC address, and so on. Skip everything. The only thing I change now is in the storage configuration, where I want to install it not on the local storage, but on the prox pool. And then everything is automatically downloaded, extracted, and installed. In parallel, we can already create a group. To ensure that everything is actually highly available, we need to create a group that we can then select for our VMs. Theoretically, we could also have more computers equipped with Proxmox, where, for example, Home Assistant should not run. That's why we need to create a group here, where we can select that they should belong to this highly available cluster. We also need to name this again. For simplicity, I will also just call it group, select all 3 computers, and see displayed here how much power they have. Accordingly, I could also assign a priority to certain computers so that based on availability, things run on them first. But for demonstration purposes, I will leave that out now. Press create, and then we can check our Proxmox with 3 computers on which the Home Assistant OS version should theoretically be running. So we can see how the whole thing was just created here, completed successfully. And then it should also boot up when we click on console. So we wait briefly until the installation is finished and then end up on the familiar screen where we get the IP address of our Home Assistant displayed. I simply open this in a new tab now and also let the entire OS download here. And finally, I end up on this screen here. Here we just create a user so that we have something here and can check if it works. So I go through the entire setup here until I end up in the Home Assistant overview. Once that is completed, we edit the VM and add our newly created group as a group. Here we could select a request state. This means how should Proxmox handle it if one of these computers were to fail? Do we want it to automatically boot up on another computer right away? Do we want the whole thing to just be moved to the computer and remain stopped? We could select that here. I would recommend simply leaving it on start. In my opinion, this is the best option. This means that as soon as one of the 3 computers goes offline, Home Assistant will be moved to another computer and booted up there. And then we have actually made Home Assistant highly available now. To test this out, we can now initiate a manual migration here. So basically, we can say that we want to perform, maintenance work. That's why we now want to empty the 3rd computer where Home Assistant Art is currently running and move it to another computer. To do this, we right-click on the Home Assistant OS, VM, and then click on Migrate. Here at Target Node, we can now select Migrate now as item switch eyes of the 2 other computers we want to restart Home Assistant. I'm now selecting Proxmox 2 and clicking on Migrate. Then we quickly receive a task OK message. This means the process has been initiated. Currently, nothing is happening here yet. It takes a little moment, and then shortly after we see this paper airplane here. This means the VM is currently being transferred to the other computer. Then it first appears gray on Proxmox 2, and after a short time it turns green. So we can click on console here. And now see how Home Assistant is booting up again. And after a few seconds, we end up back on the login screen, can log in, and are back to Home Assistant as we are used to. Now I want to test the whole thing again. However, this time I want to see how long the Home Assistant is actually offline. For this, I'll move this window to the side and place the terminal next to it. So now I'm doing a continuous ping, essentially trying to reach the Home Assistant IP address all the time. And we should see on the right side, as soon as there's no response, from the IP address indicating that Home Assistant is temporarily offline. So we're initiating another migration, this time back to Proxmox 3. Here we can already see the paper airplane. This means the migration has started. Currently, however, Home Assistant is still fully accessible. Now the whole thing has switched, so it's now on Proxmox 3, and we see the first timeout of the requests. This means that from now on, our smart home is currently offline. So now we wait a few seconds. Now we can see that my computer no longer recognizes the IP address. Meanwhile, the VM is already starting up here. So we see the green arrow, and then we already have a response again. So after a few seconds, Home Assistant is back online. The special thing is that, as you can see, even the IP address is transferred to the other computer. So we don't have to worry about having multiple IP addresses and somehow trying to make them point from A to B via a load balancer. Instead, Proxmox takes care of everything for us, even transferring the IP address back and forth between the different Proxmox machines, so we truly have a high availability setup here. Theoretically, we could also set priorities to ensure that it runs on the most powerful machine among them. Ideally, we would have 3 machines of the same type, so we wouldn't have to worry about that at all. The only thing that remains open, of course, would be something like Zigbee, for example. So if we now have a USB stick, the whole thing would be relatively impractical because we don't want to have the USB stick plugged into one computer and then have to manually switch it. But there's a relatively simple solution for that as well, because you know it from previous videos. I've already introduced these Zigbee sticks in a video, which actually have a network port. So we can confidently get one of these adapters, set it up centrally, and configure the IP address of this device in Zigbee to MQTT, which ideally never changes. And if one of these computers should ever break down, Home Assistant simply starts up on another computer, reconnects with the Zigbee adapter, and everything continues to run as before. So you have an extremely short downtime of maybe 10 to 20 seconds at most. In the best case, no one notices anything. You can set up a monitor that simply checks these 3 computers and sends you a notification as soon as one of them fails. You can calmly maintain this computer, check what is broken, repair it, reintegrate it into the network, but your smart home continues to run in parallel the whole time. That was, of course, a lot of theory. I would say, finally, let's do a practical test and actually take a look at the whole thing in real life. And then you can already see my test setup here. On one hand, I have repurposed an old laptop here. So this is my Proxmox 1 computer. Then I have the thin client introduced in the last video. This is my Proxmox 2 computer with 2 hard drives each, as previously announced. And then I have the new computer here, which comes with 4 2.5G, which I obviously can't utilize in this case. But ideally, you have 3 of the same computers, so 3 of these here, and then you can actually run the cluster over a different network interface. All these 3 computers are connected to this switch here, so we actually have a fully redundant setup. Meanwhile, I look back here at my computer, and as you can see, the computer here is completely accessible. So Home Assistant is online. We now know that Home Assistant is indeed running on this computer here. And now we will perform the worst case scenario that can happen. I slip, stumble, and accidentally hit the network cable here, pulling it out. And what happens is Home Assistant is no longer accessible, so it's offline. We can now also observe the whole thing here. So we see in the data center that Proxmox 3 is offline, and we are only getting timeouts here. If we were to try to operate a light switch now, nothing would happen, and we will just wait to see how long it takes for Proxmox to recognize the situation and start the VM on one of the other 2 nodes. And after a few seconds, we can already see here that a ping is coming through again. We can now look at the 3 computers here and see that Proxmox 1 has been selected again as the new host, and Home Assistant is starting up here as well. Here too, we can look into the console again and see the IP address and the Home Assistant start screen. To verify, we can actually log in with the IP address here and then see our Home Assistant dashboard displayed. And that's how easily you have a fully redundant smart home setup. Finally, a brief conclusion and the question, who is this actually worthwhile for? I would say for all of you who are often not at home, who might rent out their apartment or simply have an extremely large home. For them, it can indeed be worthwhile. However, I would personally first focus on using a decent computer and decent components. So if you have a Raspberry Pi with an SD card, for example, it might be more worthwhile to actually switch to an SSD before you start building a redundant setup. Because it must be said, you need each component 3 times. So you need the hard drives, 3 times the computers, 3 times, and of course you're only protected if one of these computers fails. So if your switch or router fails, you still have a problem because your smart home would be offline then as well. However, for those of you who host many things at home, maybe even host things for other people, it might actually be worthwhile. I will definitely link this mini PC in the video description below, and I would be very happy if you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback to write them in the comments. If you enjoyed it, feel free to give me a rating, and if you don't want to miss anything, feel free to hit subscribe. Otherwise, I would say that's it for this video. We'll see each other again next week. Until then, take care and goodbye.